Welcome to the Peaceful Parenting Podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Rosensweet, mom of 3 young people, peaceful parenting coach, and your cheerleader and guide on all things parenting. Each week, we'll cover the tools, strategies, and support you need to end the yelling and power struggles and encourage your kids to listen and cooperate so that you can enjoy your family time. I'm happy to say we have a great relationship with our 3 kids. The teen years have been easy and joyful, not because we're special unicorns, but because my kids were raised with peaceful parenting. I've also helped so many parents just like you stop struggling and enjoy their kids again. I'm excited to be here with you today and bring you the insight and information you need to make your parenting journey a little more peaceful. Let's dive into this week's conversation. Hey all, welcome back to another episode of the Peaceful Parenting Podcast. Today is a solo episode with me, and we are going to be talking about when saying goodbye is hard. Whether it is drop off at school or when you leave to go to work or go out for an evening with your partner, sometimes it can be really, really hard for our kids to say goodbye to us. Before we dive in, I just wanted to let you know that today's podcast is brought to you by my How to Stop Yelling at Your Kids e-course. It is a 21-day program that has been really, really effective. I've had thousands of parents go through it, and they have had great achievements and success. We start out from the very beginning what you need to do, and I take you through tools and strategies to get to your goal. So if you'd like to check that out, it's at sarahrosensweet.com/yelling. It's a 21-day program. It'll walk you right through. It works if you do it, and I would love to see you inside the program. Again, that's sarahrosensweet.com/yelling if you would like a proven roadmap to how to stop yelling at your kids. Okay, let's get back into today's episode. So whether we're talking about drop off at school or saying goodbye at home, there's a few things that we want to look at before we get into the tips. The first thing is looking at problem solving. Is your child unhappy at drop off or when you go out for the evening because they are unhappy with the babysitter, the babysitter's kind or fun, or they don't feel comfortable with the babysitter? That's one thing to look at. Or is it that the school maybe is not a great fit for them, the school or daycare? So we want to problem solve first. Is it a good person or place that you are leaving your child with? And that's something to look at, first of all, and make sure that we can cross that off our list, that we feel good about the person or we feel good about the school and we feel that it is a good place for them. The other thing to look at is, how is your child after you've left? Is it that moment of goodbye? We're going to be talking about that later. Is it that moment of goodbye that's hard, and then as soon as you're out the door, your child is fine? I was joking with my dog groomer. Whenever I bring my dog to the groomer, she shakes and cries, and the groomer assures me that as soon as I walk out the door, she's fine. And I said, it's just like preschool drop-off. Anyhow, how is your child after you're gone? Do they bounce back? Do they get into the swing of things and move on? Or do they continue to be really unhappy? If that's the case, you might want to look at the first question again. Is it a good fit or a good person? The third thing that we want to look at is, have you given enough time for transition? So, and I know this isn't possible for everyone, but if your child is starting at a new school or starting school for the first time, or if they're with a new babysitter, have you been able to have an overlap with them to where you spend time together or you spend time in the school and you do a slower transition? Again, I know this isn't possible for everyone. And now I think with COVID, sometimes parents aren't allowed in the classroom. But really providing for that slower transition for our child to get used to a new place or a new person, that can also be really, really helpful. Finally, we want to look at, is this separation anxiety? Is the child actually going into full-blown sort of panic attack when it's time to say goodbye? Is this more than just a sort of garden variety, it's hard to say goodbye to mom or dad or my caregiver? And do they need actually some strategies to help them with their worry brain? That's our favorite go-to. The Lynn Lyons approach to anxiety is, externalize it, help the child with their worry brain. So if you think that this is more than just it's hard to say goodbye and you need some strategies to help you with anxiety, we'll link to some strategies in the show notes. So those are just some things that we want to kind of check off our list before we start moving into the tips that I'm going to share with you today. So assuming that we've problem solved and that it's a good fit and a good place, assuming that your child bounces back after you're gone, assuming that there's not some real separation anxiety happening, and assuming that we've been able to, if possible, take some time for a transition, let's look at some tips for making that goodbye easier on everyone. One thing you might consider is who is doing the drop-off. I know that sometimes one parent is easier to say goodbye to than another parent. I remember when my middle son was about 2.5, he was in a home daycare down the street from me, and he said, "I like it better when daddy drops me off." And we realized that it was a little easier for him to say goodbye to his dad than it was for him to say goodbye to me. So whenever possible, his dad would bring him to the drop-off. So sometimes you have some flexibility around that and sometimes you don't. But if possible, so look at who's doing the drop-off and see if that might make it easier to start with. My next 2 tips are about before you even leave the house. So make sure that you have some time to connect in the morning, or, connect before the babysitter comes, I guess. The reason why these separations and goodbyes and drop-offs are so hard is because our kids really don't like being separated from us. They really would like to spend all day, every day with us if possible, most of them. And it's hard to say goodbye. It's hard to be away from the person that they love most in the world. So if you can fill their connection cup with a little bit of special time or some time spent in the morning snuggling and reading books or, whatever it looks like in your family to connect, if you can build that into your morning, if it's before school, or build it into the time before you go out, really try and spend some time, even if it's only 10, 15 minutes, connecting with your child. That will make saying goodbye easier. The other thing that we want to consider even before the saying goodbye is get your child laughing. If your child historically has had a hard time around separation from you, then they're going to have some tensions and stresses, or maybe just even tensions and stresses from life or from the day. If we can get them laughing, that helps the body shed those unprocessed tensions and stresses and really will make that moment of goodbye easier because they won't be carrying around the unprocessed emotions with them in that moment. So get some laughter going, and you could do a twofer with laughter and connection being the same thing. Do some roughhousing, get them laughing, and use that as your connection time. But really, before you even think about that moment of goodbye, you want to make sure that you've connected. You want to make sure that you have done some laughter. And I know we can't always do this. These are all sort of gold standards that I'm talking about. We can't always make the time, but whenever possible, it's going to make things easier. You also might consider coming up with a goodbye ritual with your child or your children. When my oldest son was little and he was going to his Montessori preschool, we had a whole ritual of animal kisses that we would do with each other before we said goodbye. I remember there was a cat kiss, dog kiss, a fish kiss, a butterfly kiss, and maybe there was one other, but we developed these different styles of kisses, these animal kisses, and every day we would do our special ritual. So that's something that you can develop with your child also. Maybe it's a little rhyme or something that you always say to each other. But kids love routine and predictability, and also it's another way of connecting, right? To have that goodbye ritual. So I would suggest that you either come up with something on your own or come up with something together, but have a goodbye ritual with your child. If your child is anticipating that you're going to miss each other, you can lean into that. Of course you're going to miss me, and I'm going to miss you too. And I used to say this to my daughter because she didn't like being separated from me. I used to say, isn't it wonderful that we're going to miss each other when we're away from each other? Can you imagine how terrible that would be if we didn't miss each other? We love each other so much that we miss each other when we're gone. So it's okay. You can, lean into that missing a little bit. We always want to remember that we want to empathize with our children, right? That we want to acknowledge their feelings. Of course you're going to miss me when you're at school, or of course you're going to miss me tonight at bedtime when the babysitter's putting you to bed. And just because we're empathizing doesn't mean that we agree that they don't have to go, or we're not going to go out, or school's a terrible place. But we always want to empathize with their feelings. That's another one of our tips for that goodbye, is to empathize. And, sometimes when kids are empathized with, when we empathize with them, that goes a long way into actually helping them not feel so upset. If we are dismissing anyone's feelings about anything, they have to dig in their heels more, right, to feel understood. So if, your child says, I don't want to say goodbye, I don't want you to go out, and you just dismiss it and say, you'll be fine, you love this babysitter, or, you love it at school, then they're going to dig their heels in even more to make sure that you understand how they're feeling. So make sure that you're empathizing. Doesn't mean you're going to change anything and not go out. It doesn't mean they don't have to go to school. Just make sure that you're acknowledging their feelings and that you're empathizing with them. One thing I see over and over again with parents is that they actually do the opposite of what we recommend in terms of making the goodbye easier. Oftentimes parents, and I totally see why people do this, but oftentimes they try to get the kid excited about what's going to happen during the separation. So you're going to have so much fun with your babysitter, Lila. You always have a great time with her, or you're going to have a great time at school today. You're going to be able to play with your friends at recess. And we try to get them excited about all of the stuff that's going to happen when we're not with them. But what kids really need from us is for us to bridge the separation. I'm going to say that phrase again. They need us to bridge the separation. That means building a bridge in their hearts and minds from when they're going to leave us to when they're going to be with us again. So a bridge over that separation time. This was a term that I believe is developed by Dr. Gordon Neufeld, and I learned about it from Deborah McNamara, who wrote about this, and she actually has a wonderful handout. We'll link to that in the show notes. A wonderful handout about ways that you can bridge the separation. So we need to do that because we need to make them feel confident that they're going to be with us again, right? It can feel like a long time, the school day, or, till they wake up in the morning and see us again after we've been out for the night. But we want to make sure that we're building that point in their minds where they know, I'm going to be separated from my mom or dad or my caregiver, and it has an end. So what that might look like is, instead of getting them excited about what they're going to be doing when they're not with you, you're going to draw their attention to when you're going to be together again. So that might look like, when I pick you up today after school, we're going to go to the park. Or when I pick you up today after school, we're going to go to the store and then we're going to go home and make dinner. Or I used to say this to my kids, when I come home, I will give you a kiss goodnight. After they've been put to bed by a babysitter, I'll give you a kiss goodnight even if you're sleeping, and then we'll see each other in the morning and we'll make pancakes or whatever it is. So we want to really build that bridge in their mind from when we're going to say goodbye until when we're going to be together again. There's some other lovely ways that you can do this by having, a picture of you in their backpack, or a special stuffy that reminds them of you. Or you can do something like, I think there are some kids' books. I believe The Kissing Hand is one of them and The Invisible String is another. These were written after my kids were too old for kids' books. But I think in both of those books, there's a ritual of imagining, one of them, there's an invisible string that's connecting the parent and the child while they're away. And the kissing hand is, I'll kiss you on the hand and you can think of me and kiss your hand when you're missing me. I've heard of some other fun ones like wearing matching bracelets and knowing whenever you miss me, you can think of me and look at your bracelet, and I'll be thinking of you and looking at my bracelet. So just these little ways that we can bridge that separation and keep the connection going even when we're not together. So bridging the separation is sort of two parts. One is building that bridge in their mind from when you're with them to when you're with them again. And then the other is keeping that connection going with either a concept like the invisible string or something that reminds them of you. As I mentioned, my daughter had a little framed picture of herself and me on one side and herself and her dad on the other side that she kept in her backpack. So having some sort of ritual around that, again, keeping that connection going, can be really helpful. Again, Deborah McNamara has some wonderful ideas. We'll link to her handout in the show notes. Before we get to that moment of goodbye, just a couple of other best practices. Don't ever sneak away. I know it can be tempting to do that while your child is otherwise occupied, and this is especially a strategy that I think parents of smaller children have been advised to use. I don't ever advise sneaking away. That will make your child really anxious that you could disappear at any moment. So even though the moment of goodbye can be really hard for both the parent and the child, don't sneak away. That will cause more problems in the long run in terms of provoking anxiety and separation anxiety. So always say goodbye. Always let your child know when you're leaving and say goodbye. A couple other little best practices. Find someone for your child to connect with, especially at daycare or school. Hopefully they're connected to their babysitter, because we really want to leave them with someone who can support them emotionally. And so you can ask, is there a teacher or somebody who can help my child after I've left, someone to give them a hug or to be with them or to help them move on and get distracted doing something else. But if possible, and I know this isn't always possible with large class sizes or whatever, if possible, find a person that can be your child's point person after the moment of goodbye. Maybe it's even another child. Maybe there's another child who's their friend who could be with them when your child is feeling sad. But, when you do have that moment of goodbye, if you know it'll make you feel better and your child feel better, if you know that there's someone that can help them and they're not just crying by themselves. Another thing that I think can help support this separation, that's just a good best practice, especially for little children, is if you play separation games like peekaboo and hide and seek, and get them, laughing, which will reduce their tension around the separation. And also it wires their brain to understand and believe that you'll always come back. Separation books can be good for that too. I remember when my kids were little, there was a book called Owl Babies, and it was such a sweet book. And it was about these 3 little owls, Sarah and Percy and Bill. And they woke up in the middle of the night and their mother owl was gone, and they were scared, and they sat on their branch and they waited and they waited. And then their owl mother came back, and she says to them, "You knew I'd come back. I always come back." It is the sweetest book. I imagine there are a lot of books out there like that. If you can't find Owl Babies, we'll link to Owl Babies in the show notes because it's just such a lovely little book. But if you read books about separation and you play separation games, that can also help children adjust to, when saying goodbye is hard. Let's get to that moment of goodbye. That's a phrase that I learned from my mentor in all things anxiety, Lynn Lyons. And she talks about how that moment of goodbye and also anticipating that moment of goodbye can be very hard. So we can talk to children ahead of time about the moment of goodbye and how it's hard. And one thing Lynn said when she was on my podcast, we'll link to this one in the show notes. I can't remember what number it is, but she talked about how we can talk to our children about externalizing our worry brain that worries about the moment of goodbye and telling our worry brain, "I'm not going to let you be the boss of me. I can handle this moment of goodbye." And of course, most of our kids, don't want anyone to be the boss of them. So tell them, don't let your worry brain be the boss of you. Your worry brain is telling you that you can't handle this. You can handle the moment of goodbye. And hopefully all the other things that we've been talking about will help as well. But that moment of goodbye it can be really hard, and kids can anticipate it and get pretty worked up about it. So we want to just say, of course it's hard to say goodbye, right? We want to normalize the worry. We want to say, you can handle this. That's the anti-anxiety phrase that we always want to be instilling and repeating. You can handle this goodbye. And yes, it's tough. We want to empathize, and you can do this. I don't recommend lingering over a goodbye when your child is upset. If they have a person who can support them, I would give a loving, firm, and quick goodbye, and then I would get the heck out of there. Those lingering goodbyes don't do anyone any good, and it can make it harder for kids because they can also sense that we're upset about leaving them, and that's why we're not leaving. We're upset about leaving them, and this must be an emergency if we're also upset about that. So we also want to make sure that we're taking care of our own feelings. It's really okay if your child is upset about things sometimes. I know this is hard for us as parents to see our children upset. And of course, if we could avoid it, we would. But there are times when parents need to go out together to have some time alone together. There are, people have to work. We have to put our children in daycare or leave them with the nanny. At school is something that a lot of people believe in. So we are making necessary choices. And yes, there may be a little bit of suffering, maybe appropriate 4-year-old suffering. It's hard to say goodbye to mom or dad or caregiver. At the same time, this is how they learn resilience. Suffering is a part of life, and we want to send them the message that we know that they can handle it. They're going to be okay, and we're not going to get bogged down and bowled over by their big feelings and draw out that goodbye and add in our own distress on top of it. And of course you're going to feel distressed. I definitely felt distressed as I would be walking away, leaving my son, and he was crying at the daycare that I mentioned before, and I would always phone a few minutes after I left just to make sure that he had stopped crying, and he always had, and he was fine. But yeah, we're wired to feel upset when our children are upset. At the same time, we really have to take care of our own feelings and remind ourselves that we are doing a necessary thing here by having this separation, even though it is so hard to say goodbye. Finally, when you're back together again, make a point of reconnecting or recollecting your child after this separation. Maybe you can spend a few minutes laughing and playing together in the schoolyard before you go. Maybe you can have a big hug or a snuggle before you get in the car, but really consciously make an effort to reconnect with your child after a separation. And then tell the story. This is so important. Tell the story of the process. So, it was so hard to say goodbye this morning, wasn't it? You were so sad when I had to leave you at preschool and I had to go to work. I hear you. And you know what? You did it. You were okay. And mama came back or papa came back because you know what? I always come back. And it is hard to say goodbye because we do miss each other, and you did it. So you really want to reinforce the ideas that it was difficult, that they managed, and that you always come back. So telling that story can help rewire their brain and help them be more able to manage the next time. I hope you found this episode helpful. If you did, make sure to share it with a friend or two, or maybe even your preschool director or your kindergarten teacher, and they can share it with any families that they know who are having trouble with some drop-offs when it's hard to say goodbye. It's so common, and you might not get rid of every tear, but hopefully some of the strategies and tips that I've given you today will help. And again, please share this with anyone who you think might appreciate this specific episode or the podcast in general. The more families we can reach, the more peaceful our world will become, that one family and one child and one parent at a time. Until next time, big hugs. Thanks for listening to this week's episode. I hope you found this conversation insightful and exactly what you needed in this moment. Be sure to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. Remember that I'm rooting for you. I see you out there showing up for your kids and doing the best you can. Sending hugs over the airwaves today. Hang in there. You've got this.